When you often think about like prison, you often really just do think about how it's very rough. It's like very gruff. You know, almost anything can just happen in the prison. You drop the soap, you know you're done. You get stabbed in the prison, you know you're done. You can get affiliated with the dangerous gangs inside of a prison. Like there's practically no hope for you within a prison cell, and you're practically there for the biggest highest reasons. Whether or not you took a life of somebody, you robbed a bank, or you did some other heinous shit that you practically deserved in there. But what if I told you that there is something to help rehabilitate prisoners in a way that's actually very good and honestly quite wholesome. At least I found out that apparently prisoners are actually able to play D&D. Yeah, that game D&D. A lot of people have always played D&D before, and I have plenty of friends who have more or less done D&D like very much beforehand. They are huge nerds of it. I practically was in a campaign once. Unfortunately, it didn't exactly went mostly anywhere, but I'm gonna be entering into like a new one like very soon, so I am glad for that. But my experience with D&D, at least at that time, it was actually like very fun. I actually really enjoy playing like a lot of the characters because at least previously when I very much was listening to like a D&D thing, I kind of got very bored of it and I feel like it was not going anywhere. Like nothing was interesting was happening. But once I actually started to be in a whole thing of D&D, I actually started to actually really like it, and I actually really enjoyed it. I'm not as obsessed with D&D, but I do really love playing it. I actually really like the stories that they're able to tell within a lot of their own unique stuff, and especially for artists, you could just make your own character to whatever you actually want, which I think is pretty neat. And now we have just prisoners just able to join in an entire fight against a dragon. They can just do whatever they want. They could tell exactly the most greatest story I've ever told behind the cell. I ended up learning about this through Philip DeFranco in a segment that he made in a video at the end, essentially explaining the whole thing of how D&D is helping a lot of prisoners, and a story with a man named Klug and Bay, who very much even after they got out of prison still manages to play D&D. Even though the one of the other things that he bought out of prison was a D&D book called Pathfinder. I do actually recommend reading the article for yourself, and as well as checking out the video on Waypoint. It's only about 10 minutes long, so it's not going to take up too much of your time, but it's a very good one. But I'm only going to be showing you about 2 clips from it.
I played around with Dungeons and Dragons, but I could never really find a solid group because my life wasn't solid. I didn't really get into that until I actually went to prison. And even though I've been to prison 3 times, I just stay focused on I'm just developing and I'm doing better each time. And I think that's important.
It's kind of just wholesome to more or less kind of just see prisoners actually really enjoy D&D, because that's not exactly the game you would think about when in prison. You usually think of the most hardest games imaginable to entertain yourself when you're in prison, and very much so it was still at least the case. They still were able to play D&D, but as we'll get into a little bit of a while, we'll see as to how that it's a bit difficult to even more play D&D sometimes. In fact, there's even kind of I guess a bit of a whole back and forth discussion as to whether or not D&D is even allowed in the prison due to several other reasons. And even honestly, if I explain all of that, I'd still would be on the side that these guys deserve to play D&D. Come on, you're literally in a prison with feeling as if there's no redemption to you. The least you can give them is D&D, and if not, you let them play Jax or something, anything.
The Department of Corrections, if you have more than 4 people who always hang out together and always do the same thing, it's called a security threat group or a gang. And a gang has to have a hierarchy. So for us to have a dungeon master, somebody who's running the game, basically puts them in a position of authority over other inmates, which is that's pretty lame because we all take turns, you know. So I want to build a cleric.
Okay.
Is that you're gonna use a dwarf? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was in seg. I spent 3 years in segregation, and I would game by myself too, like in a cell. And the SEALs would come by, and I had pieces on on my desk, and they'd be like, "What are you doing, man?" I'm like, "I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, dude." You know.
This is also something kind of a funny note to put here. Klug, the man that is with Bay and is actually the DM master within the whole video, when he very much got served an 8-year sentence for robbing a bank in 2010, when he got caught and was sent to the prison, he ended up starting up a game, and very much because that Klug was actually a nerd way before he was sent to prison, which is ironic because the way the detectives at that time actually found him was that they found on his online history that he registered for an online local D&D event. They caught him there and had the headline reading "Fantasy Game Player Arrested in a Real Life Robbery," and his immediate thought when he very much got sent to the prison was just to start up a new game with the prisoners. Which, I don't know how you get to that point where, like, you very much robbed a bank, you went to a local D&D event, and even when you get sent to prison, you're just like, alright, you know what? We'll start off a clean slate, new story, new people, let's get this ball rolling. And I don't know how you managed to get to that type of, like, conclusion, the hoops that you kind of get to. But I think it was just really, it's kind of a nice giggle to get that he just immediately starts just a new one up, even when he's just thrown behind a bar. So I think that's just, like, pretty funny if I gotta say so myself. So now you also might be wondering exactly as to how also, like, the correctional officers and, like, the other higher forces view the D&D game. Well, they only view it as about the way that as most of an officer would be concerned if a prisoner was, like, drawing up a map, because in the last video, like what Ben explained, is that it's very much hard to play D&D because if there are, like, more than, like, 4 people and it's like 5 people, that's just considered a gang. And because you don't want to have gangs in your prison, because you could start, like, revolutions, essentially they only have, like, an hour at most to play in D&D, and it's always almost never guaranteed that the next day they can catch up on the campaign. According to Klug, most of the guards at the Sterling Torrance at the game, even looking on with a bemused curiosity asking questions. Perhaps they are struck by the unexpected juxtaposition of some of their most notorious troublemakers slipping into the skins of elves and other fantasy creatures. Some even go as far as to encourage it. They like it, and it takes a lot of imaginations. Even had a correctional officer go to the office and print up Dungeon's new rules and all kind of stuff for our game, Bay says. However, over the years, there has been the occasional guard who read sinister bonus into the game. A couple years ago, Ben says, "Hey, a lieutenant took an active interest in breaking up our game, taking our pieces, and sending out maps on the board to make sure they weren't escape plans." Which, to be fair, I guess for the officer, I guess I would understand that you wouldn't want your prisoners to escape in the whole thing, because it's kind of hard to do that, like, make a whole map, because they can't even, like, make a map. Like, it's kind of hard to do because the prisoner guards would always mistake it as, like, just an escape plan. But and even so, most of the prisoners would have to try to come up with the campaign altogether. But that's also impossible to do so because everybody has to go within this blindly. Essentially, all the players are given the information, they have to make up the story as long as they go, but they know the answer, which is just not fun. It's not a fun way to play it. Even I would say that's not the best fun way to play the whole thing. As it turns out, this wasn't the first time the correctional officers have suggested D&D could pose a security threat. Back in 2004, a Waupun Correctional Institution in Wisconsin inmates were banned from playing D&D, and Dungeon Master Kevin T. Stinger's game material were confiscated, including a 96-page handwritten manuscript outlining a campaign he was developing for the game. Singer sued the prison, claiming the seizure and ban violated his free speech and due process rights. Which honestly, I got it. Like, listen, I'm not sure what crime these prisoners had was done to do this, but I believe the confiscation was just way too far gone from just playing D&D, man. Like, they are not. I feel like this officer was kind of a dickhead. Like, a little bit. You could have just looked at the book. It was like never going to be like an escape plan. They probably were just way out their time and do the whole right thing. But I guess that just comes out the window, unfortunately. So at the trial, Captain Bruce Searsock, the prison's security supervisor and also the man responsible for the confiscation, attempted to justify the prison's decision. He testified that the role-playing game, like D&D, promotes competitive hostility, violence, and addictive escape behavior, which can compromise not only the inmate's rehabilitation and effects on positive programming, but endanger the public and then jeopardize the safety and security of the institution. Seeger appealed the decision 6 years later and escalated to the United States Court of Appeals, 7th Circuit. There, Singer presented testimony to show that D&D and role-playing games in general were effective tools to rehabilitate inmates, yet the appeals courts upheld the ban. While inmates have access to many games in prisons, D&D is one of the few that actually cooperated by role-playing players who work together. Essentially, what people are both seem to be always worried about is both that as to whether or not the prisoners even deserve to most play D&D. Because in prison, it's meant to be a punishment. It's meant to almost be an entire punishment for essentially everybody because they all did some bad things to each other. And now they're essentially playing D&D as well as just a way to essentially just get along with each other and very much understand it. Which is also which is also very effective as well. Even in this article from the Mount Tampus College with a title called Dungeons and Dragons: A Life-Changing Experiences by MTM College. It actually very much tells a actual story that actually involved an entire of two people actually experiencing something completely different and playing characters that are actually meant to be the polar opposites of one another, and they actually have to very much work together within that, actually, which honestly is still very good because it very much allows other people to actually cooperate with one another. They very much get to themselves, their inmates, their own characters, and very much find out things about each other that actually help out with it. And I think it very much also works. The D combats segregation by presenting a different perspective on the very thing that people use as a reason to segregate, the difference of others. The game, such as D&D, requires diversity to not only with classes, but also with the race. The adventures are formatted in a way where different people and different skills are needed at different times to complete for them. For example, a party of all fighters might do well in combat and scenes, but they would suffer when it comes to social situations or intellectual challenges. In addition, no one knows what race of being the party may encounter that leads to the next stage of the adventure. If the party cannot be represented by someone who can be seen as friendly to that individual, the adventure may end prematurely. There's also even another thing that also makes it harder for people to also play in D&D, which is also the thing that is also a thing that they most have to try and work around, which is essentially that the dice, miniature maps, and character sheets are essentially, they have to find a work around the way. Even in states where RPGs are allowed, restrictions on the use of dice can complicate gameplay. In an effort to crack down on gambling, most correctional facilities in America don't allow offenders to use or even create dice. Yet they say they're a necessity as the mother of invention. Necessity, as the case may be, boredom. In their efforts to circumvent the ban of dice, players have come up with a variety of ingenious ways to make rules for everything from making the illicit dice themselves to designing intricate spinners out of batteries and paper clips. There's even also a mention, even in the article as well, where they actually use poker cards to also kind of make a system out of it, where depending on the card, the card you draw would be on for how roll a D20 or a D12, and very much how that all works. So they very much have to find very creative ways on just how to do this with the dice and the whole character sheets, and they even had to have some guards also review most of their stuff before they most had to play. And there was even, I think, a detail also that one officer was willing to also write out their whole thing for them to was help make it like to write out a whole map for them to make the dungeon, and essentially had made it show that it's not an escape plan. It's a dungeon. We're just playing D&D. We have no intention of just escaping. Okay, this isn't like every stock standard prisoner movie. For some groups, the drive to get the creative goes beyond the fabrication of the dice. While materials like miniature maps and character sheets are usually permitted in theory, finding the resources to create them isn't always easy. For E, what's the worst for our prisoners? Gotta have maps and minis for everything. While incarcerated in Massachusetts jail, Joe found a way to tackle the challenge. Minis were made by using chapstick tube to punch holes into flip-flops and then use circular punch-out bits that would mark for our characters or monsters. As with any good play session, they made sure to stock up on gamer fuel ahead of time. We would always bring snack on cookies and chips while playing, but we didn't have soda. It was always tea or hot chocolate when we gamed. And that's honestly what I really wanted to just kind of put out there and just talk about, because I found that this whole thing to be incredibly wholesome. And if D&D is the thing that can very much help people out there with a lot of the problems, even in a prison cell, then honestly I'm all here for it. Obviously there are some things that very much could be circumvented and very much can raise concerns for it, but I think it's just a really good story on which just how D&D is actually helping prisoner inmates be a lot more better and actually get along with people a lot more. It very anytime I read this story almost all the time, read the story even as of now, it kind of reminds me of that one that scene in Paddington 2 where he very much gets sent to prison and he just turns everybody and everything in the prison into the most nicest place on earth, where it doesn't even feel like hell. It just feels just the nicest place on the earth, even though it's meant to be a place that you're meant to be punished. And that's how I kind of just saw this with the whole the whole D&D prisoner thing. I think it was like that. It was very, very wholesome, and yeah, that's about it. Bye bye.